Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Am I visible and audible?
You are both. You're all those things. You're everything.
Thank you for that affirmation. It is a thrill and an honor to be in conversation with Susan Choi, who is a major American writer. Susan, own it, deal with it.
Oh, thanks,
And
honey.
has been, I'm thrilled to say as well, a close friend for what, 20 years, a long time.
At least. Let's just say, yeah, let's just round
Major
to
American
the
writer,
nearest decade.
formidable player of the dictionary game. We can explain that later if you'd like. I feel like I have been in a 20-year conversation with Susan, and I look forward to 20, 30, 40 more years of it. Susan, goddess of the realm, light of my crepuscular life.
I can't wait for the 40-year mark when we're like shriveled mummies propped up next to each other.
I'm there already.
Yeah, right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean to interrupt.
This conversation is specifically in recognition of the publication of the paperback edition of your remarkable novel, Trust Exercise. Would you read a short section just to get us started?
I will read a short section. Wearing my very, very cheap Foster Grant red plastic readers that I bought in a panic one day outside of Politics and Prose when I had lost my good reading glasses. I'm going to read a scene from early in the book when we're with our young drama students at school, and they get a new movement teacher, Ms. Rozo, and I'm not going to really set the scene any further except to say that we're following Sarah and David, who've just had a nasty breakup, and now they're in movement class with Ms. Rozo, who is explaining to them what they have to do. They are to walk, 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 move, move, move. All through this marvelous space, they must make themselves free to explore every inch. Not the catwalks or ladders, no. Laughter. All right, you are all very clever. You will explore all terrestrial inches. In literature, there is an idea called automatic writing. You write without resting your pen. The pen must keep moving and moving. Perhaps it is writing, why the fuck do I have to keep writing? More laughter, shocked and charmed at her profanity. Her profanity, tinged as it is with her accent, is more charming than shocking. Is it possible they could respect her? Well, this unbroken movement of the pen, says Ms. Rozo, unlocks the secrets within. And if the pen can do this, then how much more the whole body? Let your body lead you. Your only order to it, never stop moving. Otherwise, it is in charge. I will help you with music. Oh no, they can't respect her. It's perfectly ridiculous. And the music she's playing, Cat Stevens, the Moody Blues. Satirically then, they walk, 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 making faces at each other, swinging their arms, bouncing on the balls of their feet, speeding up comically so they're marching like robots. Whenever Norbert and Colin pass each other, they make absurd faces. Then when they pass each other again, they both make absurd faces and leap in the air, still without breaking stride. This behavior spreads, evolves. Most of the boys adore Monty Python and embarrass the girls at lunch with their flawlessly recalled and completely unfunny enactments of skits by which they, the performers, are slain with hilarity. In the black box, the boys now do silly walks, and then Pratt falls in motion to show they are slain with hilarity. By and large, the girls grow increasingly serious as the boys grow increasingly ludicrous. The girls no longer walk, they glide, they skim, they slice. The music changes to classical stuff without words. The girls begin taking on speed. An additional layer is added, high speed without hitting one another. They are weaving a mad tapestry with their movements. Some unpredictably change direction in the hope of collisions. No matter what they do, no matter how subversively they do it, Miss Roso cries from the sidelines, "Good, move, move, move. Ah, you are making something." Indeed, they are. Somehow silliness dies. All the theatrical forms of movement, the silly walks and pratfalls, but also the arm swinging, "I am carefree," and the deliberate direction changing, "I am a rogue," leach out of the room. Unexpected collectivity has slowly emerged in its place. Perhaps most important, embarrassment has been given up. Without their having noticed it, they're no longer embarrassed. Their speed has equalized until they're all going at about the same rate. Their winding paths, their clover leaves and hairpins and loops knit some underlying pattern as if they learned this maypole dance beside their parents as children, as if it binds them to something and makes of them something. Sarah's face is streaming tears. At the point where she ought to curve left or curve right, she goes straight and plunges out the black box doors and down the hall, running, her speed snatching the tears from her face.
I'm going to applaud that right here in my living room. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was gorgeous. One of the great things about being in my position is that I can ask you all the irritating questions I hope no one ever asks me.
Do it.
Yeah.
And I can't even reach out and throttle you from where I sit in Brooklyn.
On that. You can throttle me later.
Do your worst.
I don't even think spoiler alert applies. I think this is probably known widely about this book. It up to a certain point, you believe you are reading quite possibly the most exquisitely written, incisive, imaginable story about high school students. And then, without going into needless specifics, it turns into something else entirely. It just completely shifts gears. And the first time I read it, I threw it down. Book, whoa, fuck, what? And Susan, first question, is really about process, like more like generally, how does any writer get from nothing to a novel? And maybe more specifically in the case of this book, that turn, that complete and utterly perversely logical shift. Could you just talk to us a little bit about starting from nothing and getting to there?
Oh my God. Yeah, starting from nothing, which, now I'm doing again. God.
No, I hate that about what we do.
We always end up having to, if you succeed and do something, then you create the conditions of having to start from nothing. It stinks. But it's fun. No, with this book, this book was like the thing that I wrote when the other book was failing. I was writing this other book and it was going and continues to go so badly and continues to be such a total failure, and continues to sit like in a pile on the floor over here, actually. Yeah, like in a box. I was working on this other book. Whenever I'm between books, I really struggle, and I'll do anything to feel as if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, right? I'll play games, I'll set a word count, and I can't, I can't have lunch until I've made the word count. Or I'll set a time count and I can't have lunch until I've sat in the chair for X number of hours. Every kind of imposed structure to try to get somewhere. And a long, long time ago, like I want to say it might have even been before I wrote my education, which was my book that came before this book. I was in that in between point where, as a writer, you don't have a project and you just feel worthless and like you haven't earned lunch so many days. And I was sitting in the Pratt Library right over here by my house, and I thought, just try to write a short story. Just try to write something that you can finish quickly that will make you feel less like a worthless person. And I started a story, and the first sentence was "Neither can drive." And it was about these two high school lovers, Sarah and David, who want to hook up, but they don't have driver's licenses, and there's no mass transit where they live. And so how will they do it? And I thought, this is such a great premise. It's really small. It's a simple problem, and it will result in a short story. And it didn't. And the file just languished. I never finished it. And then, years later, when I was working on this book that is the failure, I started like sneaking back to that file with the unfinished short story about the horny teens whenever I just needed to make word count. And at times the other project was going so badly that like lots and lots of words would get dumped into the other file. And at times the other project was going better, and I would leave the other file for like months or even a year without looking at it. And I'd kind of, sneaking into it, I didn't have any expectation of it adding up to anything. So it didn't really matter. But even so, it kind of ran its course. Like I'd written all this material. It wasn't interesting to me anymore. And then when things were going poorly with the other book, I didn't really have anything to, like, it's like when you're cheating. Not that I ever have done that, but imagine that you were cheating on someone that you felt committed to, and then you kind of lost interest even on the person you were cheating with. What would you do? And I went back to that file one day and thought, well, what if I just completely changed it again? And that's how the book ended up turning into the book that it is. It was because I was just kind of playing around, actually, with like no expectation of showing it to anyone, but just sort of come on, you got to do something with this. Like, what if we dove in at a totally different angle? Why not?
Yeah. Could you identify the point at which it began to feel like a book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was like I say that in a weird, like sad tone, like, yeah, I remember that day. I remember that terrible day when I thought, oh no, now you're actually writing a book over here instead of just having fun, instead of just making a mess that like no one ever has to see. When I dove in at that different angle, as I've described it, it was in the fall of 2016 when we were, just beginning to kind of, obviously we couldn't imagine the world we were going to be residing in right this minute, unimaginable. But it was clear that Trump was the Republican nominee, and the way in which that campaign was going was giving the clue to the way in which sort of our national life was going to head. And I'd been so agitated and so mystified and so infuriated that was kind of where this turn in the book came from, was the idea of someone else telling your story and telling it horribly and getting it completely wrong. And you're so angry that they're speaking for you. It just makes you want to burst in and say, no, that is not what's happening. And so that's kind of what happens in trust exercise in the middle. Someone bursts in and says, no. And I knew as soon as I heard that voice everything she was upset about. And I wrote that section really, really quickly during the whole, nightmare period of the campaign leading up to the election. It was really strange because I started that section around mid-September and actually finished it right around the beginning of November, right as we were going to vote. And it was like that kind of inflection point in the national life that also coincidentally was the inflection point in the book, where when I finished that section, I thought, oh, now I have like two chunks. And these two chunks feel like they're calling out for something to unify them and for something to like make them be a book. And then my heart sank because I was like, now I actually have to turn my attention to this and try to make it work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I write myself, and yet it is so endlessly fascinating to me to try to understand how anybody else does this. How do you get through it? Do you show, who are your readers? And how long do you go before you show anything to anybody else?
Yeah, it's different every time. I
Uh,
mean, and I want to know all these things about you too, although we've talked about some of them in the past. By and large, I'm really, really nervous about showing work because I'm a control freak and also super insecure. And I think, you know, insecurity as a writer is really confusing because on the one hand, at least for me, um, when the work isn't going well, which is a lot of the time, right? It's like it could be every day. There might actually be many minutes during which the work is going very badly and they are endless
very bad.
and painful. And all you want to do is pick up the phone or like shoot an email to someone and say, will you please look at this and tell me that it's not terrible? And so that's one side of the deep insecurity, right? Is you just want someone to affirm what you're doing. And then the flip side is that for me, if I show something in progress to someone because I want affirmation, but then they react with brilliant intelligence, as my readers often do, and say like, well, I noticed this, or what about that? Or they start asking questions or making observations. Suddenly my fragile idea of what I'm doing often gets like all screwed up.
Right.
Right. And it's so hard. And then sometimes also it totally comes into focus, my screwed up muddle of ideas. And you never know which it's going to be, right? If you show something to somebody, you have no idea if they're going to say the thing that brings it all into focus because they're genius, or if they're going to say something that, maybe equally brilliant but completely shatters your ability to continue working. So I don't know. With trust exercise, I could never decide when to show it. It was a real like whipsaw. Like sometimes I would show it to somebody because I was sort of interested by it, but always the pressure was on the other book, which was kind of a blessing in a way, because trust exercise rattled along with very few people ever getting a look at it for a pretty long time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Are there people you show things to consistently? Do you have a reader or two or more who are like your go-to people?
I mean, yes, but that small group has changed over the years, depending. Um, it's evolved in part just due to the way in which in our lives, like the people that we're close to and in contact with, that evolves. Also, some of the people who have been most indispensable to me as readers, because they're freaking geniuses, are also like highly in demand elsewhere in the world. And
Right.
so like if you have the
By the way, would you read 400 pages and talking about
I know you're busy.
their time?
Yeah, like I know you're busy writing this movie and finishing that novel and doing all these other brilliant things. But could you just also, yeah. So like part of the problem is that if you choose really well and have really brilliant people in your life who can read your work, sometimes often they're not available. So yeah, but there's a core including my indispensable friend Semi Chalice, who has read my work since we were grad students, and who is one of these geniuses who's generally, being paid by so many other people to bring her genius to them, but still brings it to me when she can. Thank God. Thank you, Semi.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sammy. Um, and then it won the National Book Award.
It did.
It
Isn't that
did. And,
crazy?
I
Just
know this is
between
a
us,
slightly
like,
risky question, but I want to ask it. Like, how was that? How was that, and how is it to get that kind of boom recognition? That, you know, hello, it's the national Susan Joy. It's the National Book Award. How is that?
it's, it's still, I'm still digesting it, and the digestive process has radically changed with the world, right? I mean, it was amazing. It made me really happy. It was a thrilling, peak experience, as we say. Like when you look back, it's like birth of your children, winning the National Book Award. Like there's going to be a small cluster of like peak experiences there that are just never going to be diminished by anything. Um, when I think back on what I loved most about it in the moment, it was so about the party. I have to say, like the fun and the excitement of being in a room full of people and being really, it's very it's a little inhumane the way they do it, because everybody's like sitting in a room dressed up together with no idea what's going to happen,
Right.
and an open bar flowing for hours. In the case of the fiction category, 5 hours, 5 hours of booze
Great.
just constantly being offered to you before the thing is over. So a lot of it was like this like survival, um this like survival ordeal where I was like, can I get to 10 o'clock without being drunk? And I had support from dear friends and comrades. But it was wonderful, Michael, and it still is. But at the same time, now that it's receded a little, and we're in this new reality, it's a lot easier to feel the flip side of it, I think, which is that there is something very arbitrary feeling, I think, about these big awards, because we know maybe better than anybody else how many incredible books
Yeah.
were published last year, how many incredible books are being published this year. So it feels like a spin of the roulette wheel a little bit.
Yeah.
And like crazy luck. And you know, how many of the books that matter most to us were never recognized at all.
Right.
So I think that's sort of a flip side, and really humbling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you, National Book Award. Thank you for giving it to this fabulous book.
Yeah, thank you, National Book Award. I'm gonna treasure it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's good news for everybody, readers and writers, when a seriously good book gets this kind of recognition. It just is. It's good for everybody.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. Simply the truth. Yeah, I think we're gonna have to talk about living and writing now. Uh,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
you and I are both writing, and we also, we teach at the same place. We've had some of the same students. We just finished teaching online. Um, yeah, let's talk a little bit about, well, writing and maybe teaching now that we live in this world.
Yeah.
How's it going
Yeah.
for you?
How's it going? Um, well, are you asking about the teaching part or the writing part?
Both. We've just said goodbye to our students. Let's talk a little bit about teaching in and out of a pandemic. It is something that a lot of writers do. How is teaching for you?
I mean, I think, and I think that this is this is maybe the same for you. We've talked a lot about this, not in front of a virtual room of people, but teaching's been really great. It's been really, really great. And I was so grateful that that part of my life was there when all this happened.
Yeah.
So grateful to have some kind of intact structure in terms of time and meaning. Like time had to be observed because there was still class. There was still, there were still students. We still had stuff to talk about. And, and as a result, like time in general had some meaning because there was a particular period of time where I had to be somewhere and where there would be my students waiting for me. And I was so glad. And I really feel like, because of the crazy timing of this pandemic with our semester, you and I went to school and we taught our classes in rooms with our students, and we shared space with them in a way that seems like unthinkably wonderful now and so far away. And then we all went home for spring recess to be on vacation, and this was coming over the horizon really rapidly. And then we never went back to school. Right? And we don't know when we're going to get back. And it was so jarring, but I also think that because we had the rest of the semester to finish, it was like a bridge to now where we could kind of get through the beginning of this experience with still some vestige of the old world. And interestingly to me, and I don't know how it was for your students, but so after the election, not to dwell too much on the election, but after the election, I remember going to class and my students said, "What are we even doing here? Should we really be writing? What good is what we're doing?"
Right. Right.
They were beside themselves, as was I. Like none of us knew what to say to each other, and it was really hard and really painful. And what was so interesting to me about continuing to teach class as this catastrophe overwhelmed us, that question never came up, and I don't think any of us even felt it. There was this really palpable shared feeling of the relevance of what we were doing. I don't know if you had that, but
Yeah, I
it
did.
felt like, yes, we have to continue. We have to keep writing. We have to keep listening to each other. We have to keep observing the world and trying to create meaning in some way. And thank God we have this little structure set up, even if it's small. It's just a dozen of us hanging out for like an hour and 50 minutes once a week. It felt like like survival, at least to me.
Oh, for
And I
me.
never sort of had that thought of like, oh God, why are we even doing this? I was
Yeah.
like, thank God we're doing this.
Thank God we're doing this. No,
Yeah.
exactly.
Was that how you felt?
Yeah, yeah, no, very, very, very much. And although on one hand it was very weird to suddenly be online, on the other hand, um, I maintain boundaries with my students. Um, I like to think we're friends, but I'm their professor, and that's that. But then suddenly, they were in their childhood bedrooms, their living rooms, and there was this sort of funny side effect of getting a sense of their lives
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
they came to college and were all Yale students, which is a considerable thing to be, but their histories were suddenly unerased.
Yes. Unerased.
I found really moving. Like, oh,
Yeah.
right, you come from this house and you worked very hard and were brilliant and got to Yale, but you came from this.
Yeah. Yeah. And so many different thises,
So
so
many.
many different, and it was really moving. It felt really vulnerable,
Yeah.
And in the same way that it felt kind of vulnerable in a nice way to also be sitting in my house and, with my noise and my kids maybe interrupting because they can't find something or want a snack or have forgotten I'm teaching, or I don't know. I just, I've felt so grateful for teaching, and it's been so uncomplicated, and it's been a little harder for me to translate all of those really uncomplicated emotions into writing. My writing
What about
is
that?
much more confused. I felt like it felt very clear that it was so important to keep our workshop going and keep looking at the students' writing. My own writing is, you know, like on some days it wins the argument, like pay attention to me, and on other days it just loses.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I can't consistently grant it relevance, you know?
I know, I know. No, I feel the same. I feel that some days there's nothing I want more than to try to re-enter this world I invented, in which
Yeah.
it there's no pandemic. I started writing it a year ago, I'm not going to put the pandemic into it now. And there are times when I look at it and think, well, what reality is this coming from?
Do you ever feel at all? Well, okay, I'll say that sometimes lately, when I feel the best about my writing, I feel the worst. By which I mean this. There are some days when I get really absorbed. I'm writing something and I feel really, really totally lost in it and kind of lose myself, which is the best kind of writing day to have, right? When like a bunch of time passes and you're like, whoa, what happened? I forgot to eat lunch. I was working. I made something that used to be just all good, right? Do you ever feel, and then I feel guilty. I feel guilty
All the time.
because it's like a form of escapism, my own work. And because we're so lucky, you and I, what we do.
You're so lucky.
We're so crazy lucky.
Yeah, yeah.
And so do you feel that? Do you feel that this sense of like, I'm really immersed in my work. Wow. Who am I to get to be really immersed in like making up a story?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is the good news and the bad news for me. I have to back up a little bit. Years ago, my mother died, and the night that I didn't know that that was going to be the night that she passed away. But I was sitting up with her. She was at home. There was a nurse there. Everyone else had gone to bed, and I picked up a book by Alice Munro, which was what I was reading when my mother left the world. And I was very much aware of the fact that it did not feel cheap or wrong to have been reading an Alice Munro story when my mother died. And I thought, okay, this is an impossible standard, but in theory, go ahead, try to write something that would not feel ridiculous to be reading at a moment like that. And I kind of feel like we are in a protracted moment like that.
Yeah.
And it's the good news and the bad news. But this better not be bullshit.
Yeah.
May not be about what's actually going on in the world now, but it better not be trivial.
Yeah.
Because
No,
look,
I think
people, look what we're standing up to, and look what some of us are surviving, and some of us are not.
yeah. No, and I think, I mean, I love the fact that it was Alice Munro, because as soon as you said that, I instantly thought, well, thank God for her. Thank God she wrote it. I've taken refuge in her writing so many times. And yeah, you're right. That's what we hope we're doing, right? Is making something that's a refuge for someone someday.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
or that just offers meaning. Maybe it's not a refuge, but maybe it offers meaning. Maybe it clarifies a confusion. Maybe it teaches something that was hard to learn. Something like that. Some use.
yeah,
That's all we can hope for, right?
Right. Trying not to waste people's time.
Trying not to waste people's time. In the moment, however, as one sits in front of one's laptop, trying not to waste people's time, it's a somewhat crushing train of thought to have, isn't it? To think, God, I hope I'm not wasting.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Write. Yeah, sure. Write something that will live forever. Go ahead.
Go ahead and write something that'll live forever. You just do that.
citizen. One more question, and then I think I'd love to hear what everyone else wants to talk about. We are having this conversation. We're privileged to have this conversation in front of and with people who are readers. As you write, as we try to slit the skin of mortality and see what's on the other side, as we try to transcend ourselves and feel mostly like we're failing at it, I do anyway, and yet do it anyway. Are you thinking of a reader? Are you? Who is this for, in your mind?
You know, right back to the guilt, but this is the truth. The reader is always me. The reader's either me or it's not really anybody. I have to stay interested. I have to have a problem that I'm trying to solve. Gotcha. And, you know, and I never think who else is going to read this until way, way, way later when the thing is kind of already congealed, I guess, and it's too late. It's too late to make it different. Yeah.
It's not returnable.
Yeah. Sorry. But yeah, that's the truth. I don't really know if I could figure out how to write with an external reader in mind. I think that would be paralyzing. I think it's a weird private process where I have to be wondering and I have to be bothered by something, and I'm trying to resolve it.
Why don't we talk to the fabulous readers who are with us tonight?
Questions if they're being asked.
They are. I have some good ones. Let's see.
Thank you, John.
So Lacey asks, I would love to know how Susan approached writing adolescent sexuality with such precision and depth. What was involved getting into that headspace and bending it towards emotional truth while also not shying away from the physicality? So just what it took to write adolescence the way you wrote it in Trust Exercise.
That's a great question. Thank you. I think the best answer is really that I did not ever think of it as writing adolescent anything, if that makes sense. I never thought, what would an adolescent sex scene be? What would an adolescent emotional reaction to this be? What would I never really thought in that way, because I think that would have made those characters feel separate and exotic and foreign to me, and then I really would have been sunk. I just wrote it the way it seemed like it would be. I really never even thought about the fact that I was writing about teenagers until really late in the game, when the book was almost done and I did start showing it to people, and then the question of who the readership was going to be came up. And ironically enough, you know, someone said, well, do you think this is a book for teenagers? And I said, God, no. I was horrified by the thought. It's about them, but I didn't think it was for them. Every teenager is different.
I also got a question from Krista about the project you abandoned to work on Trust Exercise, and whether you thought that abandoned project was more like your early work, The Foreign Student, American Woman, Person of Interest, or whether it was more like My Education and Trust Exercise. And I guess on top of that, whether you see that split in your own work, or whether you think of it as all just one piece.
Thank you. That's a great question. I totally get the split that Krista is referring to, or at least I get that there is a split. I don't think of my books in that way when I'm writing them, but like looking back, I'm like, yeah, my first 3 books were highly researched, and they all involved politics in a certain way. And then the more recent 2, I think are less that way. My Education was actually explicitly undertaken by me as a project that would not require research. I was like, this will be easy. It won't require research. And it was like the hardest book I ever wrote. I struggled so much with that book. But so yeah, I see that split. And this book that I've been wrestling with for years and years now is more like those first three. There's research involved, there's politics involved, and it's just killing me. And yet I can't stop being bothered by the problems that I'm trying to figure out in that book. So I'm actually kind of working on it again. I hate to even say that. Weirdly enough, like I did one of these events, one of these live online events a couple weeks ago, and ended up talking about that failed project. And strangely enough, I hadn't touched it in years, and I've kind of been poking at it again. So you never know what these live online events are going to do. But that's what happened.
I have a nice comment from Marcos. Tell Susan your bread loaf buddy Marcos is here cheering you on.
Hi, Marcos. Thank you. And I am so glad you're better.
And this is, I think, my favorite question because it references another one of my favorite writers, which is Susan. You mentioned in the midst of writing Trust Exercise that all you wanted to do was write a Muriel Spark novel. Trust Exercise is viciously brilliant, ravenously gorgeous, as good as the best of Spark, and reminiscent too of her in those qualities.
Wow, thank
you.
you.
Can you speak at all to the resonance? Or I guess another way of putting it is, what has Muriel Spark meant to you? And was she actively, was her style and her books, a frame of reference for you in writing Trust Exercise?
Yes.
Oh, which books?
Yes. Boy, so many. I mean, I think, Prime of Miss Jean Brodie remains my very, very favorite of hers. And I could just read it every year and it would never get old. And there's a lot of, I mean, it's never like a point to point correspondence, but I think that book was really on my mind when I was writing Trust Exercise in a lot of different ways, and probably readers of that book might be able to see why. But Far Cry from Kensington, Girls of Slender Means, like all of really The Bachelor's, Memento Mori. I mean, like really any one of her books. I think it's her tone. She's so. This is going to sound horrible to say, and perhaps I shouldn't say it, but Muriel Spark is not the nicest seeming author. There's something very lean and mean about her. Not as a person, I never met Dame Muriel, but her authorial vibe is a kind of a lean, mean, like tough reader. If you don't like the characters, too bad. Lots of people are not likable. Too bad, reader. If you don't get what's going on, I am not going to waste my time explaining. Just try to catch up. Like she's a badass, if I can use that word, on live internet, whatever we call this. And so I really wanted that energy. I was stuck. Like I said, the day that I wrote the sentence that ended up being the first sentence of Trust Exercise, I was thinking of her. Like that sentence, neither can drive. I was like, how would Muriel Spark start something? And I was like, that's how she'd do it. She'd just be like, neither can drive. This is a situation. You can just figure it out. I'm going to say the least amount possible. And she's very like cold.
Yeah. Have you ever read The Driver's Seat?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Ooh, so good. Have you seen the movie?
I haven't seen the movie.
It's worth watching.
Is it worth watching?
But it is worth watching.
I mean, I just, she's, I just don't, I think that her books they range from like really good to like unbelievably brilliant. How did this happen? Yeah. None of them are unworthwhile.
Let's see. I have a question about the title. The title Trust Exercise seems to posit that the relationship between an author and a reader in fiction itself is a trust exercise. Was that intentional, or would you mind speaking more to that, the choice of the title?
Yeah, that was such a happy accident. Like so much of this book is a happy accident. Like the book itself, its existence, happy accident, the structure, happy accident, the title also a happy accident. When I started that distracting file that was just meant to get me to word count so that I was like entitled to have lunch, I called the file trust exercise. And I called it trust exercise because I was thinking of 2 students in drama school. And, you know, I went briefly to a drama program, and I remembered trust exercises as being a thing that we did. And you know, I thought that that would be something that they would do at some point in the story. And so that's just what I called it. And it wasn't until later that the title took on all of these, you know, relevances that I wasn't expecting. You know, that's just like, so much of writing is like that.
Was there ever another title?
No, there was never another title. And I've never, I think it is the first time I've ever had a title before I had the book itself. I almost always write a thing and then like just go into despair trying to title it. And this was the first time that like the title grew along with the thing.
I think we have time for one more question. Another good one from Marina. Your writing is both precise at the micro level and has undeniable momentum. So I've always wondered, as you're writing, how much do you fuss at the sentence level?
Oh, such a good question, Marina. Is this, well, it matters neither way. Thank you, Marina. If it's my Marina, thank you, darling. If it's some Marina that I don't know, I'm sorry to call you darling, but it's a great question either way. I fuss a fair amount at the sentence level because it's in my nature to fuss at the sentence level. I'm like one of those people who has to stop herself from rewriting emails because I'm like, that doesn't sound quite right. And, you know, 45 minutes later, the 7-sentence email is finally ready. It's a really bad trait in this world. So I actively try not to let myself fuss at the sentence level. Like it's a constant struggle where I'll actually say to myself, keep going, just stop being in this sentence, because that's my instinct.
That seems like as good a place as any to finish things. Michael, thank you so much for moderating tonight. Susan, thank you for welcoming us into your home and for talking about this wonderful book. I hope everybody who's tuned in, if they don't already have a copy, orders one from us to support McNally Jackson and Susan Choi, and keep an eye on the site. We'll be doing a whole lot more of these, but this was just a lot of fun and a very nice way to spend a Friday night.
Thank you, John. Thank you
John.
so much, Michael. And thank you, McNally Jackson. Please buy books from
Buy
them.
all your books from McNally Jackson. Buy McNally Jackson. They have buy t-shirts. They have that.
Buy t-shirts.
Yeah.
Buy whatever they're selling.
We've got mugs. We've got everything. But thank you again, everybody, for tuning in, and especially thank you, Michael, and thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all for coming. Good night, everybody.